Donald Trump were to win the 2024 election, there are several key issues that his administration would likely prioritize. On the domestic front, Trump has expressed a strong commitment to cutting back government programs he views as promoting racial or gender equity, criticizing current social justice initiatives, and rolling back regulations in areas like environmental protections. He has also indicated a desire to reduce the influence of tech companies in politics and to challenge their immunity from certain legal actions. Trump's foreign policy would likely shift towards a more isolationist stance. He has shown skepticism towards NATO, signaling a potential reevaluation of the U.S.'s role in the alliance, and has suggested that he might seek to end U.S. support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. His approach to governance would also likely see more centralized control, especially regarding executive power, and a focus on investigating issues related to the pharmaceutical industry and other sectors he deems as corrupt. Trump's re-election would likely mean continued polarization, with a strong push to address what he perceives as unfair treatment of his supporters and harsh critiques of opponents. His leadership would likely embolden far-right movements and increase tensions in the U.S. over social issues. We can expect his presidency to focus on several key areas, both domestic and international. His administration is likely to continue emphasizing his America First agenda, which includes reducing immigration, promoting nationalism, and seeking to reshape the U.S. economy through deregulation and tax cuts. His stance on climate change would likely remain dismissive, continuing his previous approach of rolling back environmental regulations. On the legal front, Trump would likely seek to consolidate his power, possibly using his position to undermine legal challenges against him and pursue further investigations into his political enemies. His government may also further politicize the justice system, appointing more conservative judges to federal courts and intensifying efforts to limit voting rights or challenge election results. Internationally, a second term could also see Trump pushing for a reduced U.S. presence in global affairs. He may prioritize renegotiating trade deals, particularly with China and Europe, while also withdrawing from multilateral agreements like the Paris Climate Accords and others that he views as detrimental to U.S. interests. Trump's handling of military affairs could also shift, as he would likely push for a more politically loyal military establishment. This combination of policies would likely deepen the divisions within the U.S. and could prompt significant geopolitical shifts on the global stage, especially with countries like China and Russia. We can expect several broader societal and political shifts that go beyond just policy changes. His administration is likely to continue pushing a populist and nationalist agenda, aiming to reshape American political norms in his image. His approach to governance could lead to increased executive power, further polarization, and perhaps greater control over the media landscape, especially with regard to press freedoms. In terms of civil rights, we could see attempts to roll back legal protections, particularly regarding gender, LGBTQ+ rights, and reproductive freedoms. Trump's stance on abortion, for example, would likely continue to promote a more restrictive approach, possibly including further legal challenges against abortion access. Additionally, Trump's focus on reshaping the federal government could involve further cuts to social programs like Medicaid, food assistance, and public health initiatives. His economic policies might lean heavily on tax cuts for the wealthy and deregulation of industries like energy and finance, with the goal of boosting economic growth, though critics argue this could lead to deeper income inequality. Foreign relations under a second Trump term could be marked by a more transactional approach, possibly withdrawing from international agreements that he perceives as unfavorable to the U.S. He could strengthen alliances with populist or authoritarian leaders while distancing the U.S. from traditional Western allies. This approach could have lasting consequences for global diplomacy and trade. Ultimately, a second Trump term would likely be characterized by bold, controversial moves that would stir deep debates about democracy, power, and governance in the U.S. These policies could further entrench the divisions that have marked recent U.S. politics. Further impacts could include an intensification of the culture wars, particularly around education and media. He may continue to push for reforms in the education system, possibly promoting curriculum changes that align more with his political ideology. This could involve an emphasis on patriotism, American exceptionalism, and conservative views on history, such as minimizing the focus on systemic racism or critical race theory. Additionally, there might be further crackdowns on dissent and protests, as seen during his first term, with a likely increased reliance on executive orders to bypass Congress when possible. Trump's policies may also extend into the tech industry, where he has expressed intentions to limit the influence of major social media platforms. He could push for stronger regulations around big tech companies, potentially breaking up monopolies or using government power to influence their content moderation practices. This could be a double-edged sword, leading to both greater restrictions on free speech from certain sources and greater control by the government over public discourse. In terms of economic policy, his administration might focus on maintaining tax cuts for businesses and the wealthy, while reducing spending on social safety nets. This could exacerbate the growing income inequality in the U.S., though supporters argue it could stimulate economic growth. On the international front, his America First approach would likely continue to strain relations with traditional allies, particularly in Europe, and possibly in NATO. He might pursue a more aggressive stance against China, using tariffs and sanctions, and continue to challenge international institutions that he perceives as undermining U.S. interests. Overall, a second Trump term could see increased tensions both domestically and internationally, with a focus on consolidating power and pushing forward his populist agenda. There would be several additional consequences to a second Trump term in office. His administration might see efforts to overhaul the welfare state, with significant cuts to federal spending on public programs. Social services such as healthcare, housing, and education could face challenges, particularly under the continued influence of a Republican agenda focused on reducing government intervention. His economic policies, focusing on deregulation, tax cuts for businesses and individuals, and reduced environmental protections, could continue to drive debates on the long-term health of both the economy and the environment. His approach to foreign policy may lead to further tension with traditional allies and multilateral organizations, as he would likely continue questioning the value of NATO and agreements such as the Paris Climate Accord. Relationships with authoritarian leaders, particularly in Russia and North Korea, might continue to shape global politics, as Trump has often expressed admiration for such regimes. Trump's rhetoric and policies could continue to inflame political divisions within the U.S., with heightened conflict over immigration, civil rights, and the role of the government in addressing social issues. His style of leadership might also encourage further polarization and mobilization of extremist groups, both on the far right and left. Ultimately, while Trump's policies would resonate with his base, they would likely fuel ongoing societal tensions and have lasting effects on both domestic and global politics. We could see his leadership usher in several significant shifts in U.S. domestic and foreign policies. Domestic policies. Trump's second term could lead to a stronger push for conservative cultural values, especially in areas like education and the media. We might see policies targeting the content taught in schools, particularly around issues like gender identity and race, as well as efforts to curb what he views as media bias. His administration may focus on limiting certain freedoms in the name of national security or protecting American values, potentially leading to an erosion of civil liberties for some groups. Economic impact. Economically, Trump would likely continue advocating for tax cuts aimed at stimulating business growth. But critics argue these policies might only benefit the wealthy, increasing income inequality. There's also a possibility of further deregulation across industries like energy, tech, and finance, which some argue could lead to increased corporate profits, but may weaken protections for workers and the environment. Foreign relations. On the global stage, Trump's America First approach would likely lead to more trade wars, particularly with China, and could result in U.S. disengagement from international partnerships like NATO and climate agreements. He may focus on securing bilateral deals, favoring a transactional approach to diplomacy over multilateral cooperation. This stance could cause strain with traditional allies while empowering adversarial regimes. Social and legal issues. Under a second Trump term, we may see an expansion of conservative judicial appointments, further reshaping the federal courts to align with his ideological views. This could have significant consequences for civil rights, especially in areas like abortion, voting rights, and LGBTQ+ protections. Trump's rhetoric and policies would likely inflame divisions within the country, increasing polarization and potentially leading to unrest in various communities. Ultimately, Trump's second term could solidify a more authoritarian style of governance, with greater control over government functions, the media, and civil rights, while further challenging the established norms of democratic processes and international diplomacy. There could be several long-term effects on U.S. policies and global relations. Strengthening conservative ideals, Trump's second term would likely continue to push for a more conservative America, especially regarding social issues. This could include further efforts to restrict abortion rights, limit LGBTQ+ protections, and impose more rigid immigration policies, including attempts to build a border wall and reinforce a zero-tolerance immigration policy. Education policies would also likely be reshaped to promote a more conservative, patriotic narrative, which might impact curriculum decisions, especially regarding race and history. Economic strategy. Trump's approach to the economy would likely continue with supply-side economics, focusing on tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, and a continued push to reduce government spending. While he would argue that these measures stimulate business and job growth, critics might point to growing wealth inequality and the possible deterioration of public services. His economic policies might be seen as favoring corporate interests, but they could lead to a short-term boost in the stock market or other sectors beneficial to high earners. Climate and environmental policy. Expect Trump to continue his climate skepticism. He's previously pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and under a second term, he could potentially withdraw from more global environmental accords or reduce domestic environmental regulations. This could negatively impact efforts to curb climate change, leading to further reliance on fossil fuels and the weakening of environmental protections. Foreign relations. Trump's foreign policy would likely remain transactional, focused on securing better deals for the U.S. He could reduce America's involvement in NATO or other international alliances if he feels they no longer serve U.S. interests. He may continue to seek closer ties with autocratic leaders such as Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un, while further distancing the U.S. from global institutions that he sees as ineffective or biased against American interests. His approach to China could continue to be confrontational, possibly escalating trade wars or imposing tariffs. Legal and judicial influence. Trump's influence on the judiciary would likely remain a key issue. With a re-elected president, the continued appointment of conservative judges could shape the legal landscape for decades, potentially affecting decisions on civil rights, reproductive rights, and voting laws. His administration could also prioritize investigations into political rivals, seeking to entrench his power even further. Ultimately, Trump's 2024 presidency could solidify a more polarized populist America, leading to contentious debates on civil rights, democratic norms, and the role of government. These shifts might not only impact American society, but could have lasting effects on the country's standing in global politics as well. Project 2025 is an initiative associated with Donald Trump and his political team, primarily focused on preparing for his potential second term in office. The project is designed to create a roadmap for his administration's policies and reforms, building upon his first term's agenda. One of its central goals is to reshape the U.S. government, with a focus on implementing conservative policies that align with his America First principles. Project 2025 includes plans to overhaul federal agencies, reduce the size of government, and streamline bureaucratic processes. It also emphasizes conservative judicial appointments and seeks to cement Trump's legacy by enacting bold changes to immigration, healthcare, and social programs. This plan could bring about significant restructuring in areas like energy, education, and defense, with an emphasis on limited government intervention and deregulation. The initiative reflects Trump's broader vision for consolidating power, reducing government oversight, and advancing the goals of his political base. It also seeks to position Trump as a champion of the right-wing agenda, addressing what his supporters see as years of government overreach and liberal policies. Project 2025 is a comprehensive plan that has been developed by conservative groups aligned with Donald Trump and his allies in preparation for a potential second term in the White House following the 2024 election. The initiative aims to transform the federal government, fundamentally reshaping how it operates to align with Trump's populist and conservative agenda. One of the primary goals of Project 2025 is to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. The plan envisions cutting or restructuring many federal agencies, focusing on reducing regulations, cutting taxes, and limiting the influence of the bureaucracy. This is in line with Trump's broader goal of dismantling what he considers to be a deep state that interferes with the will of the people and obstructs his agenda. His administration would likely focus on regulatory reforms that favor businesses, reduce government oversight, and decrease public sector spending. Project 2025 also emphasizes the importance of appointing conservative judges across the federal judiciary. Building on the legacy of judicial appointments from his first term, Trump and his allies aim to place more conservative judges in key positions, including on the U.S. Supreme Court, appellate courts, and federal district courts. This would shape the nation's legal landscape for decades, especially on issues like abortion, voting rights, and government overreach. The project further seeks to overhaul various sectors of public policy, particularly in areas like healthcare, immigration, and education. The plan advocates for a tough stance on immigration, particularly through border security and restrictive policies. On healthcare, the focus would likely be on reducing the influence of government programs such as Medicaid and reforming the Affordable Care Act. Education reforms might include reducing federal involvement and expanding school choice. Additionally, Project 2025 may involve expanding the military and taking a more isolationist approach to foreign policy. The vision includes prioritizing U.S. interests, renegotiating trade deals, and reducing American involvement in international organizations that don't align with U.S. interests. In summary, Project 2025 is designed to guide a second Trump term and is about consolidating conservative power, reducing federal oversight, and reshaping U.S. policies across key sectors to reflect his populist, nationalist vision. The success of the project would depend on Trump's ability to gain enough support from Congress and the American public to enact these sweeping changes. Project 2025 is a broad initiative aimed at shaping the next Republican administration with a focus on restoring conservative policies across the U.S. It is not associated with a particular candidate, but is believed to align with the policy goals of Donald Trump. The project is supported by more than 100 conservative organizations, including influential think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and conservative groups like the American Family Association and the American Legislative Exchange Council. Among the prominent figures involved are several former Trump administration officials. These include individuals like Jonathan Berry, former counsel at the Department of Justice, Ken Cuccinelli, former acting Secretary of Homeland Security, and Ben Carson, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, among others. These figures are working on proposals that aim to overhaul key areas such as the judicial system, national security, and the regulatory state, aiming to create a more effective and limited government aligned with conservative ideals. Project 2025 is a political initiative spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, aiming to promote conservative and right-wing policies. The project's focus is on reshaping the U.S. federal government, centralizing power in the executive branch, and consolidating influence in a more conservative direction. It proposes actions such as eliminating agencies like the Department of Education and dismantling others, reclassifying civil servants as political appointees, and pushing for changes in healthcare, immigration, and environmental policies. Among the people and organizations involved in Project 2025 are prominent conservative figures and groups closely aligned with Trump's ideals. Key contributors include former Trump administration officials such as Ben Carson, Christopher Miller, and Russ Vought. The project has drawn attention from organizations like America First Legal, the Center for Renewing America, and the American Accountability Foundation. Several conservative think tanks, women's groups, and Christian colleges have also provided input into its vision. While Trump's campaign distanced itself from some specific policies outlined by Project 2025, many of his allies are involved, and the project reflects his administration's priorities. especially concerning immigration enforcement and curbing government bureaucracy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and leave a comment below. See you next time.